Hi, everyone. I'm Malka. I guess some of you already know me. So I'm here speaking from my house. So good afternoon here in Brazil, but also good night in Israel. I think it's about like 11:30 in Israel. Today we have two very special guests here with us. You already know me probably. So I present and produce the podcast from Instituto Brasil-Israel. I was also part of Shalom I am part of Shalom for pretty much all my life. So today we're going to have a really interesting conversation about incitement. I hope you've watched the movie. It's really, really worth it. So I'm going to present to you our two guests tonight. So Yaron, can you please
Hello.
come on?
Hi. You want me to say something?
Yeah, just say hello and tell people what you've been up to and where you're at.
Okay. So yeah, exactly. I'm on the road right now from Haifa, a city the northern part of Israel, on the way back to Tel Aviv after a long shooting day. This is one of 3 shooting days that were filming soldiers from Yom Kipur War from 1973 that will be part of the last episode of Valley of Tears, which is a show about Yom Kippur War. In Israel on Monday, we'll screen the last episode. So I'm just filming now some stuff that I want to still include in the end of the last episode. That's why I'm driving.
Great. And I'm going to invite Rani to say hello as well. Rani, thank you for being with us tonight.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm actually in Jerusalem. I'm a scholar at the Hartman Institute and one of the leaders of Bet Israeli in Tel Aviv, which I lead with Rabbi Esteban Gottfried. If you're familiar with the family name, you're right. It's the brother of Adrian, and I'm happy to be here to discuss an event that I still consider to be probably the worst day of my life. If we speak of a crucial moment in the history of the state of Israel and also for me personally.
Perfect. I watched the movie this weekend. It was a punch in my stomach. Really, really hard to watch. So the first question I'm going to ask you, I'm going to start with the hard one, right? The one that triggers everything. Was Rabin's assassination an accident or not?
Wow. Okay, I'm going to start and say that I don't think it's an accident. Of course, it's not an accident because it was, to start with, the killer, the assassin, was planned. It was pre-planned and also was part of major incitement that was conducted by politicians, by professors in the university, Bar Ilan University, where the assassin studied, and also by rabbis of the West Bank. So it definitely wasn't an accident. An accident is like when you shoot, you try to hit maybe a bird or maybe aim at a target and it by accident hits a prime minister. But this is not the case. It was in cold blood, well calculated, with history behind it. And that's what the film shows.
Rani?
Yes, I would add to Yaron's interpretation or view of the moment that I think still a lot of what has been perceived as possible was shattered on that day. We had previous political assassinations in Israel, usually from right to the left, but this is also under debate. I think I still remember that walking back from the rally on then Kikar Malchei Israel, after watching Rabin singing the Shir Shalom, I had a call from a friend from high school. I was then 25, and he said, I'm sure there will be some sort of an attack on Rabin from someone from the far right. And I said, what are you talking about? Most of the settlers leaders are serious political people. They're Zionists. and they have a lot of respect to the institution and government, and it will never happen. And of course, history proved, of course, the opposite. So I think, of course, it wasn't, I don't think it was an accident. It culminated after a long time of incitement and all kinds of marks. Still, I think it was a shattering, like a glass that is broken by some sort of an explosion. I think it did break a lot of what we thought of ourselves as Israelis, as Jews, as what is possible towards one another in Israeli society.
Perfect. If someone barks around here, this is my dog, Golda. So,
Golda.
We assume.
again.
We're going to Yom Kipur right away with Golda.
Yes, she's a bulldog, and I thought it was very similar. She's the one barking. So where were you both at when it happened? How were you feeling at that time? Because you were both able to like live through that time in Israel. What was going on by then? Like how did you assimilate what was going on?
Well, I was, we all felt the immense pressure, and we knew that there's danger and something can happen. Violence can erupt any day. There were previous attacks on Rabin. That wasn't the first one. We did not expect any shooting or an assassination, but we felt it, the hatred and the tension. There were rallies before that, as you know, in Zion Square in Jerusalem. 100,000 people were screaming and shouting things like, "With blood and sweat, we're gonna take out Rabin." Pictures of Rabin with the SS uniform. We saw, all sort of posters of Rabin with sort of Israeli blood on his hands. We knew that something can happen. We did not expect that specific event to happen, of course, but there was that tension. On the night of, I was in there was a bar mitzvah of a family member that we were, had to be there. So I was there, and, at the end of the bar mitzvah, I was about to go to it's called, way back it was called King of Israel Square. Now it's called Rabin Square. But I wanted to arrive to the rally, but we heard that there was a shooting, so the event stopped, and we, sort of ran to our cars. We started to drive, and then we heard that Rabin is probably dead. All the cars stopped in the middle of the street. We went out of the car. Nobody could drive. It was a, traumatic shock. We couldn't believe what happened, the devastation, and the tragedy that occurred.
What about you, Roni? You said it was the worst night of your life.
I think after many weeks and months of a lot of tension, there was, I think the fall was so hard because the rally itself was a moment of uplifting, at least from my point of view, from those who were supporting Rabin. Of course, there was those who were opposing him. For me, I felt that for many weeks and days, we should also mention that there were terrorist attacks going on from the Palestinian side that also added to the tension immense fear, not on the political level, the inner political level, but also with the whole process on one hand of Oslo and also at the same time of buses starting to blow up. I think many of us felt that Rabin was left alone, that for many, many weeks, he was walking in the streets, being guarded by his bodyguards, the government officials that's supposed to, but there was no serious public support. And I think that is one of the reasons that led to the mass population that that gathered in the square that night, that there was a feeling that we finally got it and showed him that after all, with everything that he saw, and it was genuine, people were very opposing, of course, many of his moves. There is also a large population that is supporting him. And the end of the rally was uplifting, you know, with him singing together. It was a moment. And he was also, obviously, it has been shown in all kinds of films, and I think also in this film, that he was in the air, right? He was shining. Rabin wasn't a shining person, but there was something gleaming in him, and even us who were far away, we could see it. And so on the walk, my parents live about 10 minutes walk there. We came back home and we were, you know, like so happy. And suddenly, of course, the news started to burst onto the screen. I have to tell you, I think for me, it was also one of the very precise moments that I saw myself praying. While he was announced to be shot, until he was announced to be dead, we simply held hands and somehow prayed, because this is what we felt that we wanted to do. And of course, I think that the announcement of Eitan Haber, who just passed away not long, will be always, whenever, I'm sure Yaron can also say that, whenever I hear the announcement being played again, I still have the shiver in my body. Even though I heard it for dozens of times, Memshelet Israel, you know, the government that Israel proclaims, wow, I mean, it still makes me shiver.
Absolutely.
But Yaron, it was a terrible moment in humankind, I would say. Why shoot a movie about it?
Wow. We tend, you know, we filmmakers tend to make movies about things that either traumatize us and we are interested in exploring that trauma, or, you know, things that are very dear to us, very important to us, either that we want to say something about it or that we want to explore, you know, why it happened and what happened and, you know, what the consequences are. And in the case of Rabin's assassination, it encompasses everything that I just mentioned. Historically, what happened is that, you know, I live most of the time in New York. My family lives in New York, and I live in New York. So I'm on the line, Tel Aviv, New York, and a producer in Israel approached me and wanted me to make a movie in Israel, and he gave me many scripts to read, and they were fantastic by great Israeli writers. But nothing was important, sort of, in a way, caught my attention enough for me to come and make a movie here, because making a movie takes years. You know, research, writing, rewriting, raising the funds, casting, filming, editing can take years. You know, this movie took 5 years to make. So we're talking about years, and he's like, "Yeah, let's make one." Nothing really captured my, you know, interest, and there were great scripts. And then, out of sort of you know, desperate move, he said, "Okay, is there a subject that you would make a movie in Israel?" And I said yes, about Rabin's assassination, because that was for me, you know, traumatic, both on a national level for all Israelis and for on a personal level for those who were, you know, so invested in the peace process. So it was shocking for me. I wanted to explore that, and he said immediately, "Yeah, let's make that movie." And that's how it started to roll. And then the decision to make it through the eyes of the assassin was the next step, to realize that that's the right way, or the way that one has to approach the subject matter.
Great. So
I would add to Yaron. Of course, he speaks from the point of view of the person who made the film. I would say that it's almost surprising, and yet not surprising, that this film has been made relatively in the last few years. So for over almost 20 years, there was silence. And for me, is just another example that, for the fact that Israeli society, we have not yet grappled with the trauma. We haven't found a serious way to give it meaning still. I can tell you that in the school system in Israel, it's a very controversial day. The religious school system almost doesn't deal with it at all. The secular school system, there it's also very problematic. And I know many teachers that would be happy not to be present on Rabin's Memorial Day, because there is no kind of ritual or agreed, some sort of a consensual way even to deal with this subject. So I think what Yaron did was so important also for our collective self-consciousness. It's one of the few attempts to start delving into this traumatic moment.
I just want to add that about 15 years ago, when I finished my first movie, I wanted to make my next one about Rabbi's assassination. That's why we started. And I spoke to a friend of mine who I, highly respect in regards to historical thinking. And I told him that I want to make this movie, and he convinced me not to make it. And one of the reasons he said there were two reasons. The first, he said, it's because it's only 9 years. At that point, it was only 9 years after the assassination. He said, first of all, maybe new information will arise. You have to wait and see. Maybe new information about the assassination, and you're going to make a movie, and then 5 years later, you'll discover that the facts there are new facts coming up. So just wait. But the second thing that he said was the Israelis were not ready. It was too early in terms of the pain, in terms of the controversy, also the political, the vision, the argument about, what exactly happened, that people will not be able to watch it. So that was the reaction. And he convinced me, and I waited. And you see, it took time, but I guess Israelis were unable to listen to it before that. And in 2020, and work on the movie.
Yaron, can you repeat this last part, because you went mute for a second?
Yeah, I said that it took time. It had to take 20 years to get the sort of somewhat of a distance from the event, so people would be able to watch and listen and be open to listen to that. And I would say when the film came out a year ago, it was also very tough, especially from the left. Interestingly enough, because it was so painful to watch it again that some people resisted watching it, which is fine, because usually it takes another year for them to watch it. But it was, relatively speaking, a great success box office wise. And I'm saying that not because of the financial aspect of it, but the fact that suddenly there was such a great interest to watch it, and people went to the cinema. And last year it was the most watched Israeli movie in cinema, besides one comedy, and we were not a comedy for sure.
That makes a lot of sense. So I'm receiving a few parallel questions here on Slido. So everyone, if you want to ask something on this live about the movie, whatever you want, please send me either through Facebook, and then they will pass it on, our people in production, or Slido. The link is probably above your screen. So the questions keep coming, and the thing that most got me while watching the movie was, did the right make some sort of auto-criticism after the assassination of Rabin? Like, maybe assumed power, so rose to power and then what happened? Do you believe that the right in Israel changed after that or questioned itself in these 25 years, of course?
My answer is this. At the beginning, yes, there was some kind of a movement of soul searching and looking inside, and there were a couple of conventions. I know about a sort of a known convention within rabbis in the West Bank that I watched a video of the whole thing, and they were actually looking inside and saying, you're realizing they made a mistake. Most people agreed that the language that was used, they heard the language and they did it, but it was only a very short looking inside or soul searching. And after a year, there was nothing on that line. The right wing completely dismissed any relationship to it or any blame or any responsibility. Bibi Netanyahu definitely did not take any responsibility. Waving at a couple of moments in a couple of rallies that he said that we should not use violence. We should not use violence against Rabin. But for me, it's the opposite. The more he said that, the more I realized that it was just empty statements. Because if you say it, you know that something is happening. And if something is happening, why do you continue the rallies? Why do you continue a rally? Why don't you do it in a more comprehensive way on TV and talking about it? So I do not believe all this nonsense. At the end of the day, I would say there was no soul searching on that side, and this is part of the problem until today.
I would like to make a distinction between some of the contemporary politicians to rabbinic teachers, spiritual leaders, and also some politicians, not necessarily those who are now in power, but I think I know people who Rabin's assassination literally from the right, who literally say that it changed their lives, including people who are leading settler leaders like Israel Harel and others, and certainly Yoel Bin-Nun, people who also paid toll for saying unpopular things among the right wingers, and who are part of the the skeleton, the mainstream leadership. So I think these voices are around. Unfortunately, I do agree with Yaron that there is too much mud wrestling somewhere up, and instead of serious soul seeking, which I also think, pounding on the other people's chest is also always very easy. And this is typical for Israeli society. So I'm sure, and we see today that there is a serious, there are serious leaders who rabbis who continue to challenge democracy and the power of government and the right to govern. But I think that there is a lot of precaution on that side. I would also like to mention that I think one of the beneficiaries of that event was paradoxically Ariel Sharon, because during the disengagement from Gaza, the right wingers, the kippot, the Zionist religious leaders, after all, led their population, led their constituency, and also soldiers and officers in the IDF to, after all, follow the orders of the elected government. And though we felt in the days of the disengagement from Gaza that it might explode into some sort of a large civil disobedience movement, it did not happen. So I think paradoxically, it was Sharon who also had some, okay, I won't go into all of that, but I think that also demonstrated that there was much more awareness of the danger of these kinds of way of incitement. It seems to me that the separation between that, those who would still keep in track and would not do it, and those who would maybe, is not clear. Where would the border cross? So that's my understanding of where we are. And on top of that, of course, we're 25 years from the event, with public and I'm sorry, with social media and things that we see all over the world. So I think the growth of hatred is not necessarily connected to that event. It's connected to a larger context that we all suffer from, or many, not only Israel, by the way, of course. I think you can see it all over the world. Um,
Talking a little further about the Orthodox movement in Israel, the question that just came
yes.
up was about how did the rabbis react after the assassination? Because it was something that was being spoken openly, but still, like, no rabbi really took the responsibility of what happened, right? What were the responses?
Well, as
In
I
that
said,
I agree with Yaron, of course. People did not take responsibility for their own actions. People who did say things, who did made halachic decisions that were unbelievable. So in that respect, I agree with Yaron.
what happened was on a national level that Shimon Peres, became acting prime minister, and he made a decision, a calculated decision, not to arrest rabbis, not to sort of promote an investigation of rabbis about incitement that went on. It was just a decision. I know because I spoke also to Galamir's interrogators, who told me that there was some kind of from above, a push for not knowing anything and not having Galamir mentioning the assassin mentioning names of rabbis. It was just enough for him to admit, reenact the on camera the assassination, and that was enough for them because they caught the guy and just he spoke a little bit about his brother involvement and his friend's involvement, and that was it. And they were satisfied because they did not want to start arresting rabbis, fearing that it's going to invoke maybe a civil war, maybe images of rabbis being arrested would be related to images that we know from the Holocaust, which are anti-Semitic in our by association, and they decided to completely, sort of hoping that it's not going to happen again. People inciting words, inciting laws, statement by Maimonides, Rambam. These were will not happen again, and that when people do the soul searching, that was the hope, and therefore let's not, talk about it anymore. And I think that was a huge mistake, terrible mistake, that um, eventually led to a lot of the damage of how Israel dealt with the assassination. But I want to tell you one more anecdote, please. One anecdote. While we were filming, one of the camera people, the focus puller, who is responsible for the focus of the camera, when we were driving to film on a location near Jericho, he told us that he was stationed near Jericho during the assassination. He was a soldier in the parachute unit, and there were two, in a way, units together. One was more orthodox, and one was the secular one. And the the Orthodox, when they heard about the assassination, they were partying all night, celebrating, partying, and that was for him even more shocking than the assassination itself. Just to see his friends from the army celebrating Rabin's death, that was shocking. So I heard many, many such stories, and this was just one of them. To tell you that the reaction was, it's not everybody, of course, but
the collective, right? The problem is
excuse
the
me?
collective. The problem is the collective. So when people get
Exactly.
together, because it's
Yeah,
not intrinsic to everyone in their most intimate self, I believe.
yeah.
Someone
There is,
asked here
there
if you,
is,
oh, go ahead, Ronnie.
no,
Sorry.
I just, of course, there is great, I think what we learned also is the great responsibility of leadership. Those soldiers who were celebrating in the, and I know these stories myself, right? And I think the great responsibility of leaders not to be a vehicle for extremism, and to keep in mind that while they're, blinking their eyes as if they're not hurt, someone will do something. I think that's a very important understanding. I think some of them did get the message. And also another point is, this was a culmination of a tension between Judaism and democracy that has been escorting, or I would say part of Israel's life since our independence. The tension between religion, Judaism, and democracy, you can you can put it in all kinds of coins. But 4th of November 1995 was a moment of explosions of these two systems. The halachic Orthodox Jewish, of course, no one, I certainly wouldn't claim that this is a messenger from, or I would say someone who is reflecting Judaism. Of course not, the assassin. But it was a moment of explosion. And one of the bothering things for me since then is there are less and less people that believe in Israeli society or still cling to the combination of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. And I think one of the most bothering thing is that this combination has started to collapse, and people either hold into one side or other side. And from 70% of Israeli Jews who are clinging to this combination and know that it's a tension, but they want to hold the tension, we have about 20% of Israeli Jews who are still clinging to this combination and want to work on it and want to keep it, to keep both of these I would say worldviews somehow working together. And that's a very bothering schism that we see, I think, in the last few years.
Perfect. Yaron, someone here asked you if you've met Yigal Amir, and if you've spoken to him. How do you see his psychic profile? Let's say, like let's put it like that.
Wow.
First of all, meeting Yigal Amir in jail is very, very difficult, very hard, and I decided not to attempt doing that. What we did do was, the family is Orthodox. His wife, he married in jail. She's Orthodox too. So I asked our head of research, who is Orthodox as well, or had an Orthodox background, to sort of meet with the wife, be with her when she speaks with him on the phone. And she gave the phone to our guy. I used to send questions. He used to ask the questions to Yigal Amir. Yigal Amir used to answer, and then I got the answers and was back and forth. So I spoke to him through a mediator, but I asked him, like, we had hours and hours and hours of conversation, to a point where everything I wanted to hear from him, I asked and got answers. So
Wow.
we had that interaction. And I would say that this conversation also helped me shape the way the script is written, and also in terms of directing the lead actor, which, acted Yigal Amir. So I got a huge wealth of information, both specific about specific events, specific decisions that he made in particular scenes, and I learned about his personality, who he was, and how to portray him. And one of the things that I learned was that he wasn't a crazy person as people would like to believe. Not at all. I would say far from that. Was very logical, very verbal, with very sort of strong agenda that was very hard to refute based on logic itself. Very difficult. And it actually intrigued me to go and search for answers within the religious world to counter his, the assassination. Not from my world. Of course, in my world, there is no justification for killing Rabin or killing anybody. But from his world, there was a justification. And I was looking for how one can counter that. That was really interesting for me. And I approached many religious people, including rabbis, to give me an answer from their world. And it was very hard to hear. So that was part of the process.
Yaron, I want to say that I think one of the most interesting scenes on that respect was the conversation between the assassin's father and him. Kind of two worldviews of what is Judaism about that are colliding in the living room. And I really thought you got a point there, because also his father is speaking more diasporic. He's more galut person. And even he tells him, you're a galut person. You're a Jew from the galut. You don't have this rigor. You're this kind of, force-oriented Judaism. And his father brings in a completely different understanding of what is Judaism about, regardless of politics whatsoever. The conversation is not about Rabin. The conversation is about what is Judaism's main values. And I thought it was a fantastic portray of exactly this kind of ideological contradiction.
Thank you. It was very important for me, in a way, on Yigal Amir's journey, becoming an assassin. I wanted him to confront, his father, and secondly, to confront somebody who will tell him, as his father tells him eventually, that even if Din Rodef and Din Moser, the law of the pursuer and the law of the informer, even these laws apply to Rabin, which means death. That's what it means. Even then, death will come from God, not from a human being.
Yes.
And I like that's the end of that argument, and Yigal Amir does not accept it as an answer.
But I would like also to, I think it goes back to what I said before. I think you made a point there about how Judaism was, we took a 2,000-year culture that was basically a community-oriented, minority, forceless culture into a sovereign state with F-16 and all the things around it. And it is not an easy move. I think that moment, the assassination, was a move that showed how complex this transformation is for Jewish culture, to become powerful and not, powerless.
Yeah.
That I think we're looking into a few mechanisms that sort of happen to go into this assassination, go into the tragedy. I feel like these mechanisms are still very alive for some reason. I wanted you to comment on what are the mechanisms that you do see that were used to kill Rabin, and how alive are they in today's society in general, Israel, the world? How do you see that this sort of, how am I going to say, this happening is still somehow actual?
I'm not sure that I understand the question about the mechanism. Say mechanism. What do you mean mechanism?
I feel like there was a lot of communication and how people were talking and using religion as a sort of tool.
Sure.
How do you feel it's still actual? Or maybe it was sort of an isolated moment in history?
Well, it's not an isolated moment. What happened was this. Israel had a leader finally that was willing to compromise and find a solution with the Palestinian people to move forward towards peace. And if you want to make peace with the Palestinians, just like peace with Egypt meant giving Egypt cyanide back, and making the end was much, much easier. There was not that much of a argument about land. And making peace with Palestinians meant giving them, to create a country. And not that Rabin, by the way, wanted to give them a country. He never said that it's going to be a Palestinian state, by the way, just an autonomy. That's what he promised, and that's what he was working towards. But let's assume that if Rabin's vision would have been eventually happened, acted upon, then a Palestinian state would eventually emerge. So that meant territorial compromise. The moment when that happened, all the incitement started for various reasons, religious and otherwise, and also nationalistic. Now, after Rabin's assassination, 6 months later, there were elections, and Bibi Netanyahu was elected, was a right winger. And at that point, there was no more talk about any sort of giving land for peace or anything of that sort. That's why you're not going to see any assassination happening, because there is no reason for that. But if a leader will come about, would want to make peace with any compromises, there's no doubt in my mind that all the incitement will start again. And with some rhetoric, assassination can happen again easily. There's just no reason for it right now. Again, because the right wing is in power, and there is no danger of peace or danger of any, territorial compromises, basically. But I think it can erupt any second. There's, if need be, if there will be any conflict on that level, there will be no problem to get people to start shooting each other.
Hani, do you want to add something on that?
Well, I think, unfortunately, again, it's not necessarily connected only to that event, which was 25 years ago. I think we see the polarization of the conversation worldwide. I mean, if I see my political opponent as someone it's not a disagreement. I hate him. It's a different game. I completely disregard everything he is, not what he thinks. So then it's very easy to simply say, and we see it in the States. We see it, of course, in Israel because of the polarization of.
In Brazil as well, don't.
Yeah, I mean, we see it all over. So that's also part of a larger process, and we have our own oil to spill on it. I want to say still on the event of 25 years ago that I think one of the tragic thing was that I think there wasn't someone. Rabin was not equipped, I mean, culturally, and there was no one around him that, I think, from what I know, that could also point out to the deep religious and identity sentiments that the process led to, that the Oslo process led to. That I'm not saying that, of course, not to, of course, in any way say that what happened is right. Of course, I was a supporter of Rabin, but the understanding that this kind of move, political move, will provoke deep religious sentiments, you have to absorb it and to address it. You cannot just say they are propellers, they're just a bunch of crazy people. No, you have to somehow make a distinction between the crazy guys and to put them aside, and to at the same time set some sort of a conversation with the moderates who might be your opponents politically, but are not crazy enough to start, or they have some sort of political responsibility, and there are enough people like that. So I hope, I agree with Yaron that this is like a volcano that can erupt. But again, I'm going back to the importance of leadership, and also to a sense of many people after the assassination, that unless we find a way to bridge between different sectors of Israeli society, we have no future. And that is a more serious danger to our future than all the things that we see around us, including one of Yaron's last series as well. Okay, I think that this kind of movement that is from the left and right and from, you know, all kinds of corners of Israeli society is happening, but there are two contradicting ways. One is polarization, and the other one is some sort of containment and conversation. Who will prevail? I think that's the struggle. That's the struggle of educators, that's the struggle of filmmakers, that's the struggle of so many of us who care for this place that we're living in. And I think that's one of the most serious conclusions I drew, and I think many people drew from 1995.
Yeah. Roni, two questions that somehow complement each other.
Yes.
So do you feel like this was an aspect of Zionism happening, like an extreme aspect of Zionism happening, sort of a symptom of Zionism?
I think we can't overlook on the fact that Zionism, I mean, one aspect of it, certainly into the I would say the establishment of the state of Israel, and also part of the cultural notion, is to create that new powerful Jew that can also defend itself and that can use force. And I think many of us want that to be like that. That's one of the lessons that we drew from history. And by the way, I don't need any justification from history to defend my kids, my family, and you know, my environment. At the same time, we also know that it was part of it was like a person who was for a very long time deprived of something, and he suddenly gets it, and we suddenly received it. And I think there is a stream within Zionism, and by the way, it's not necessarily left or right, it was also part of some parts of the left, that has, I would say, also almost fetish towards force and towards militarism of all kinds of sorts. It might be an outcome of our condition. So I don't think it's an outcome of Zionism, it's an outcome of perverse Zionism. But I can understand how did it came to be? That's what I want to say. And what was the next question?
The next question is, so who was Bibi 25 years ago? Who is Bibi now? Was there a transition? Is he the same person? Are we talking about the same politician that we've watched 25 years ago in the movie?
Yaron, would you like to answer that?
Wow.
You see that I hand it to you.
Thank you so much.
I've been willing to answer it, of course, myself.
No. I will tell you, this is my opinion. I'm very, wow. I'm not politically correct when it comes to that. I personally, based on the research that I conducted for many years on the subject in order to make this movie, I can say that in my view, He has a major responsibility towards Rabin's assassination, major responsibility, and I think he's still an inciting, a politician that uses incitement whenever he needs to get something to his advantage. And in this regard, I think he did not change at all. It's horrific what he did way back, horrific, to the level where I think he has blood on his hands. And it's still horrible. He uses it whenever he needs. Lately, he doesn't need to, so he does nothing about it. But in the past, when he needed, there's no doubt, statements about Arabs, statements about leftists, statements about anything that, if he needs to get his base excited and vote for him, or in particular protect his agenda, he's going to incite and he's going to do whatever is needed. So I personally really think that is a huge damage to Israel and to the Jewish people. That's my point of view. It hasn't changed, and yeah, very glim.
I believe that there is no chance we're going to have a peace process again with this sort of government, right?
There's no doubt about it. Obviously, you can see that. There's no talk. There's nothing. So I don't think there's any chance. No. Not with this government.
Roni, your take on that?
They make peace with our with countries that we have relationship, that everybody knows that there's relationship for a decade. That's how they make peace. It's which is always great. We can make peace with France now, peace with Italy. We can sign peace treatment with Britain, no problem. And we sign peace with Arab countries that actually are in good relationship with Israel. So that's cool. It's great. I'm for it, but this is not our problem. That's not the challenges that Israel faces.
Of course, Rabin used to say that, right? You don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies.
Exactly. And I would say that the peace that he created, I mean, that move, everybody today likes to say that Oslo was a disaster, the peace process meant nothing. Well, we have so many. Look, there's no terrorism, and you can say, relatively speaking, especially not these days, you can say that it's because Bibi's tough, right-wing attitude. But I think it has to do with both sides, meaning that there is a coordination, a security coordination on both sides for decades now, and I think that's the main reason why things are under control. Because if they wanted this to get to erupt, violence to erupt, it can happen any day. That's not an issue. So that coordination, that collaboration, even when there's so much mistrust and no peace talks, I think that's what Rabin actually established, and it's the reason why we, can get away with no peace talk and still a minor level of violence, despite the fact that we occupied their territories.
Roni, do you want to add on that?
Yes, I'm trying to be somehow optimistic. I don't think we're jumping into a new peace process tomorrow. But I think serious people here understand that Israel is facing a challenge that cannot be overlooked. And either will cease to be democratic or will cease to be Jewish. Will cease to be a Jewish state. And I think the status quo right now somehow holds. I don't completely follow Yaron's analysis of the collaboration, but it doesn't really matter. This is where we are right now, and the occupation is here, and we're controlling another nation, and I don't think that can last for the next 50 years. It cannot. So Israeli society, the majority will have to somehow at a certain point make a decision. Do we want the whole, the whole land, and then it will be one vote, one people, and there will be, it won't be a Jewish state anymore, because of course we understand that, or it will be an apartheid state, which will be not democratic and not Jewish, because I don't see also how Jews from the world, from the States, from Argentina and Brazil and from all over would be able to identify with such a country. So it wouldn't be Jewish, respectful of Jewish values, and not respectful of other Jews in the world. So that's the decision we're facing. And it's a very tough decision, because I have to admit, as a person who was a supporter of Oslo, I do see the security and the security challenges that we're facing. And the claim that we left Gaza and we got missiles is not something that you can disregard. Of course, you say we left without the, I know all the arguments, and it's fine, but that fear is something that fuel a lot of us Israelis. So we have to break through this kind of status quo, and to have some, I don't know, some sort, and for me, that's also Zionism, to take action, not to sit like that and to think that time is for us, because time is not for us. We have to take action and to forge our future, to do something, not just to sit and wait. And people tend to say, look, with the Arabs, it will never work, the difference of culture. Take a look on Europe. The Germans and the French killed each other hundreds of times more than we have already killed. I mean, now Yaron is shooting Shat Ne'ilah on Yom Kipur war. In the First World War, Germans and French people killed each other thousands of times more, and now they live in peace. So looking on that history, I don't think it's undoable. It's a matter of will and persistence, and again, of leadership. In that respect, we don't have the leadership that it seems to be walking in that direction, but I don't think it's impossible. I hope so, for my kids and for myself.
So my last question.
I just want to say that I believe in peace, and I believe peace can be achieved. I'm just saying not with this government. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
So this is my last question before we say goodbye. We're talking about all these huge scenarios that sort of pressure us into finding a solution for the conflict. What's your view on the resolution of the conflict, you two? How do you feel like this is going to resolve itself?
What, of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Yes.
I mean, I think in general, there will be some agreement that has to do with giving the Palestinian a country. There will be a land for peace kind of solution. There will be, there are all sort of maps being drawn. There were so many parties already involved in drafting these maps, and I think a solution is there. It's just a compromise has to happen, and the dream of the larger Israel has to be abandoned. And I don't see how this is happening right now, because the majority of, politically speaking, the majority of Israeli politicians are totally against it. So, what I think when it comes to the people of Israel, it's more even in that respect. But I think the solution is already drawn. It's not, a big intellectual problem. It's just, Israel now is the strong, and the strong needs to show, courtesy and compassion, and offer a peace solution and a compromise, and to solve this issue. That's, I think, what needs to happen, and it's possible. Roni.
I would like to join that. Somehow it seems to me that the solution is quite clear to most of the players. There will be a swift of land somehow. It will be less of a state, no air force, no army. I think those kind of framework. If we're going back to Rabin, I think this is also. It seems to me, again, I'm not a political expert. This was kind of also his vision of it, not a full country, like a less of a some kind of that. I want to surprise you. One of the things that I'm hearing more, and I think it's very important, is an attempt to bring in religious leaders into this process and to find voices within places that are not only from where I grew up in North Tel Aviv that would support it, but somehow something that will also bring in the long-standing traditions of the Middle East without which you can't move here. This is not Scandinavia. Even though the process started in Oslo, with all due respect, it will take place in Jerusalem and in Bethlehem and in Yafo and in all of those places. And here, identity and tradition are major players. So I think one of our most important challenges is how to bring our traditions to play a positive role in creating peace and not to stand against peace. It's not that I have a magic dust or some sort of a woof thing that I can do, someone can pull out of the hat. But I think with a long conversation of religious leaders who approach each other, and spiritual leaders and people from culture, we can make it happen. And I think while politicians are doing their stuff, educators, artists, spiritual leaders, religious leaders we should do what we have to do. And somehow I hope these two processes will merge to something that will help life be the principle of our existence and not death and violence.
Yaron, Rani, thank you so much for being with us
Thank
tonight.
you.
Thank you very much.
And I want to thank Yaron personally. I said it before the broadcast, for your artistic achievements. Thank you.
So
as a viewer.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Looking forward for Shat Neilach here in Brazil.
All right.
נסיעה טובה.
Thank you. Toda raba. Ciao.
Bye bye. Thank you, Mark.